So the problems that you worked for Mendelian crosses that you did for the first assignment were all what we call complete dominance. If you were homozygous dominant, you had two dominant alleles, which we represent with two capital letters. And if you remember, a straight nose was the dominant gene. If you were heterozygous, having one dominant and one recessive allele, that dominant, as long as you have one, it would be expressed and you would still get a person with a straight nose. Only individuals that were homozygous recessive who did not have any dominant alleles, if you remember, would get the Roman nose. Or if we were doing the pinky shape, you'd get a straight, and crooked, it was crooked, and straight. But anyway, you would always get only two phenotypes. You would either see a person with a straight nose, whether they were homozygous dominant or heterozygous. You would only see a Roman nose here, two phenotypes. There are some genes that are what are called incomplete dominance. This is similar to what will happen if you paint a room that is white. If you paint it with a dark color, some of the white will bleed through. In this case, the dominant will not necessarily cover the recessive. And so what's going to end up happening is we will get three phenotypes. We will still only have two alleles. So, as an example of incomplete dominance, we have hair texture. The dominant allele is straight, which will represent with a capital H, and the recessive allele is going to be curly. We'll represent that with a little h. So, if a person has two dominant alleles, they are homozygous dominant. So this person will have straight hair. If a person is homozygous recessive, they will have two recessive alleles and they will have curly hair. Notice, straight hair has two dominant alleles, you get straight hair. Two recessive alleles, you get curly hair. The difference for incomplete dominance comes with the heterozygote. A heterozygote for hair structure would have one dominant and one recessive allele. However, they're going to have neither straight nor curly hair. Whatever the heterozygote is not going to be one of the alleles. It's going to be a blend. It's going to be halfway between the two. This person will have wavy hair. Straight hair, perfectly straight. Curly hair really wraps around. Wavy is halfway between. So incomplete dominance means we have the ability of that recessive allele to show through a little bit. Complete dominance, the dominant allele, if present, will always be expressed. It's still being expressed here, but not completely overcoming this. So incomplete dominance means the recessive allele can be seen a little bit. So incomplete dominance, the recessive allele is not completely masked, which means to be covered over. A little bit of the curly got through. Another example of this is some flowers have a color, can either be red or white alleles, but some of them show incomplete dominance, and we can also get pink flowers. So another example is flower color. You have a dominant allele, which is red. You have a recessive color, which is white. But when you do the three phenotypes, an individual that has two dominant alleles will have a red flower. An individual who's homozygous recessive will have a white flower. But the heterozygote is going to be a blend of the two. And if you mix red and you mix white, you end up with pink. So the heterozygote is a blend of the dominant and recessive alleles. This is not an allele seen, it is a phenotype. So we still have two alleles and we have three phenotypes. So you'll be asked to do some questions similar to our monohybrid crosses for complete dominance. So I'll ask you the same things. I will ask you, or I will give you information about the parent genotype, the parent, I do phenotype first, sorry. So we have the parent phenotype, we have the parent genotype, we have the parent gametes, and then we will have the offspring phenotype, and we will have the offspring genotype. So as we already mentioned, for flower color, we know that red is dominant, so we'll have a capital R, and white is recessive. Oops, so it gets a little r. So you should have had some blank sheets left over from your worksheet from lab. So you can now fill this Punnett square in and follow this example and have it recorded in your set of worksheets. You might want to put above that one incomplete dominance so you know it's different from the ones that are previous. So let's say we had one parent who had red flowers and another parent that had pink flowers. Because this is incomplete dominance, we know that red flower parents have to have two dominant alleles. It's the only way you're going to get the red. But we know that pink is a combination of the red and the white, so we know that if you see the intermediate phenotype, you will always be heterozygous. So the intermediate phenotype is always going to be heterozygous. When these individuals undergo meiosis, because remember, in order to create gametes, we undergo meiosis. So from here to here, we have meiosis, we have segregation. So that means some of the gametes, we'll make these the male. The male can only pass on dominant alleles. The female, some of her eggs will have the dominant, some of her eggs will have the recessive. We'll do the Punnett square, same as before. We only have to do as many gametes as we have that are unique. So I could fill in a capital R for that other one, but I don't need to because these two are the same. And so when they come back together through fertilization, some of the zygotes will have two dominant alleles. Some of the zygotes will have a dominant and a recessive allele. Now here's where it's different. This individual has only dominant alleles, so they will be red. So our offspring could be 50% red or 50% pink. Remember, when you have incomplete dominance, you take the dominant and the recessive and you blend them together. If you blend red and pink, red and white, you get pink. This individual is homozygous dominant, and the pink individual is heterozygous. So you can see these problems are work the same thing. The only thing different in incomplete dominance is how you interpret that heterozygote. Let's work another one. So you can fill this in on another of those leftover pages that you have in your worksheet that I gave you. In this case, we'll do one with hair texture. So the trait is hair texture. In straight is dominant to curly. So you know that this is the dominant because we're using the capital letter. You know this is the recessive because we're using the lowercase letter. So what if we had one parent who had straight hair and we crossed them with another parent who had curly hair? Well, the only way you can get straight hair is if you have two dominant alleles. So they were going to be homozygous dominant, two dominant alleles. The only way you can be curly hair is to be homozygous recessive. So when these parents go through meiosis, this parent can only pass on. So we'll make this one the mom. It doesn't really matter who's mom and who's dad in these. We'll make these the dad. Mom can only pass on dominant alleles because mom only has dominant alleles in her genome. Dad can only pass on recessive alleles because he only has recessive alleles in his genome. So when you do the Punnett square, even though you have all these boxes, you only have to do one box. If you only have one kind of gamete to pass on, you only need one column and one row. So all of these kids are going to be heterozygous. And if you blend straight and curly hair, you get wavy. So all of these kids will have wavy hair. Notice there is no wavy allele. It is a blend of the two alleles because the dominant is not completely covering over the recessive. That's why it is incomplete. These will be 100% heterozygous. All these individuals. And this is why I say it doesn't really matter. If you were to fill out all of these, you notice it doesn't change my numbers, does it? When we look at all four boxes, if you do happen to use all the rows, 100% still have wavy hair, 100% are still heterozygous. So it'll save you some time if you only put down in the box, in the Punnett square, the unique alleles. So I don't need this one, and I don't need this one. I don't need to fill in these three boxes to finish the problem. I can do it without that. So let's do one more example, and then you'll have more to go on to do for your homework for this section. So just like before, my snouters, they can produce mucus, and the mucus has a color. The dominant color for some of them is red. So red mucus is going to be dominant to yellow mucus. So what would happen if we started with a parent who was, one parent, let's say, has orange mucus, that's their phenotype, and they're crossed with an individual with yellow mucus. So some of you may be going right now, well, where did the orange come from? There's no orange up here in my alleles. Remember, this is an incomplete dominant. And if you mix red and yellow, think of your color wheel. Red and yellow are what make orange. So if you see something that is halfway between, you always know that this is the heterozygote. The only way you can be yellow mucus is to be homozygous recessive, so you get two recessive alleles. This parent can have two unique types of gametes. This parent only has one unique type of gamete, because we can see that they only have recessive alleles. So this will make your Punnett square easier. For that parent, you only need to use one column because you only have one unique. This parent, though, has two uniques, so you have to use both of your rows. These alleles come back together through fertilization, and we now have one zygote who has heterozygous, meaning that they are orange mucus. And we have one zygote that got two recessive alleles, so they have to be like the parent, and they would have yellow mucus. Their offspring genotype, the orange are heterozygous, and the yellow are homozygous recessive. So, when dealing with incomplete dominance, it is that heterozygote that changes. Homozygous recessive stays the same, homozygous dominant stays the same, but if you are heterozygous, you will have a blend. So red and yellow on the color wheel become orange.